Would that be okay? Yes,
perfect. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So officially now, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Haris Amatopoulos and I'm the Director of Sustainability Innocenter, which is a non-profit organization that is located in Sweden, in Uppsala, that is operating on the borderline of innovation, research and sustainability. And as a partner of this project, proud partner of this project, I'm happy to be your host for today. So the webinar today is the second webinar of a series of 4 webinars under this EU project that is called DyMoN, Dynamic Mobility Nudge. And today we talk about models of behavioral change that help understanding deeper human behavior and how behavioral interventions and nudges can be built on them. Furthermore, we will show how digital tools can help in shaping mobility behavior and discuss best practice examples. For that, I have 2 very good colleagues with me and partners in this project, Claudia Luger-Basinger, who is a senior researcher and psychologist at Salzburg Research and project coordinator of this project, of the DyMoN project. And Claudia will talk about enabling behavioral change in the digital environment. And then we have David Leistner, who is a talented junior researcher at Salzburg Research Center, who will talk about how we work with digital nudging for sustainable mobility. So this webinar has 4 modules. The first module will be from Claudia, enabling behavioral change in digital environment, and then models of behavioral change that will be presented by Claudia and David, and then David will present the digital motivation via mobile applications, and then altogether we can have a more open discussion, and a small session together with the help of a tool that is called Mural, that will actually send the link in the chat so you can already join in this tool already now. I do not have so much more to say. I would like to give the screen to Claudia. Claudia, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Haris, for the introduction, as always. So my name is Claudia Luger-Basinger, as Haris so kindly introduced me. And let's start with a very short introduction to our project. So many cities are faced with this challenge, people relying very heavily on individual car use. And not only cities, but governments all over the world, politicians, researchers, and many other organizations are asking themselves the question, how can we get from this scenario to a scenario that looks more like this, where people rely more on sustainable forms of mobility, such as bicycling, walking, or public transport. And this is not only a question of a reduction of CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. This is also a question of quality of life within cities. Because if we have less car use in cities, we have better air quality, less noise, and more space for people instead of cars. And within our European research project, DyMoN, we want to help at least one step along the way from the left scenario to the right scenario by bringing together disciplines that are not always necessarily working together. So we have geoinformatics, geography, software development, and information technology, meeting psychology, the social sciences, innovation, and behavioral insights. And what we are doing within the project is wanting people to be motivated to go from the left to the right scenario. Specifically, the idea of the project is this. When we talk about interventions or measures to achieve more sustainable mobility, we can talk about 2 kinds of different interventions. So we have the hard interventions for sustainable mobility, such as laws, regulations, also infrastructure. And they only go so far. They are not always effective. They are not always possible. And sometimes they are just very expensive when you think about infrastructure. And we need something to support these hard measures, hard interventions. And for this, what we see often done is soft interventions that are targeted towards changing motivation, changing social norms, and so on. And this latter part, these soft interventions, are exactly what the DyMoN project is about, because we want to offer digital data-based behavioral interventions that we also call nudges, in order to motivate people for sustainable mobility. And these data-based behavioral interventions are really coming out of the interdisciplinary work that we are doing within the project. So psychology meets geoinformatics, meets software development, which is making this approach possible. And this webinar series is our place to share results, to show insights, to talk about highlights and also challenges within the project. And this is the second installment in the webinar series. There is a first webinar that happened a couple of weeks ago, and you can find the recording also on our homepage. And this webinar will be very much focused on the psychology and behavior change models to motivate people for sustainable mobility. So I will be talking about what is needed for behavior change, the psychology behind it, and also how we can enable behavior change in the digital environment. But before we go deeper into research and studies and our results, I just want to remind you that changing behavior, changing yourself can be very hard. We all know that people have multiple limitations and barriers within their everyday lives that might hinder change. But sometimes, even if everything is perfect, so to speak, and we are motivated, change can still be hard. And I think a good example for this is coming up pretty soon, and I'm talking about New Year's resolutions. So many people are going into the new year motivated to change themselves, and oftentimes they just fail. And if you think back, what was your last New Year's resolution for 2023? I cannot even remember mine. Maybe you can remember yours. But sometimes we have resolutions that stick with us. So a couple of years back, I wanted to become a runner. So I always envied people who enjoyed running, and I said, okay, I want to achieve that for myself. And I would consider myself a runner now. I don't do any marathons, but I occasionally run. So I think I was successful in changing my behavior. And what was different to other times when I tried to change something was that I had a community. So I had family and friends that already run. I set myself a realistic goal, doing 1K first, and then 5K, and then 10K. And I also had digital tools to support myself. And of course, there are countless other times when I failed with my New Year's resolutions. And if that happened to you too, just know that you are in the best company, because the second Friday in January is known as Quitters Day, apparently. So this is where most people give up on their New Year's resolutions. So you're not alone in this. And if you would care to share, you can post your New Year's resolutions in the chat. Maybe you have achieved it, maybe you have not. And just remember, sometimes we need a little bit support for changing ourselves. And when we talk about change and supporting behavior change and directing decisions in a different approach, one term that comes up pretty quickly is nudging. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this word, with this method. It is basically a method to guide behavior into a certain direction. And it stems from psychology and behavioral economics. So with nudging, the freedom of choice is still preserved. So you do not ban or limit any options. People are still free to choose. And it can be considered as one of many behavioral interventions. So behavioral interventions means an intervention in order to change behavior accordingly. And we have nudging in the project title. So dynamic mobility nudge. Not everything we do is nudging, and we are aware of that. But it is just a word that is directing a lot of attention. And nudging rests on the observation that many of our decisions, much of our behavior depends on different factors that are not always necessarily rational. So we have our habits, our routines. We do things because we have always done them this way, because our family does it. And this is guiding our behavior, sometimes on a very subconscious level. And what nudging does, it changes the environment in which decisions are made. So the so-called choice architecture, for example, by presenting new information or presenting options differently. And two very famous examples for this method of nudging are defaults and social comparison. So a default is something that most people will comply with if presented to them. So if you want people to choose something, make the preferred option the default, because many people will go along with it. If you want to save paper in an office, you can make the default for printing to two-sided instead of one-sided. And the reason why this works and why this is a nudge is that many people want to save paper, but they are just forgetful in the process of printing. They forget to click the right button, the right box. and then it's one-sided again. And so the default for two-sided paper remedies that. And of course, if you want to do it differently, you can still change it back. Now, social comparison is a little bit of a more complex phenomenon. It refers to our human tendency to evaluate our own opinion, our own behavior, to those of others around us that are important to us, our reference group. It could be family, friends, neighbors, and so on. And we tend to correct our own opinions, behavior to those around us. And there have been many experiments with social comparison, also with nudging. And I will come to that a little later in this talk when I show our own experiment. And of course, you can have nudging also in the digital environment. So this means that you use nudging as a digital tool to not only influence decisions in the digital environment, but also in the real world, so in the physical environment. And I'm sure that many of you are very familiar already with this concept, because using mobile apps and digital tools to guide behavior and to support behavior change is very common already in fitness and sports. So when I started running as a New Year's resolution, I pretty quickly bought myself a fitness watch. And what these tools typically do, they not only track our performance so that I know whether I had a 5K or a 6K on my run. But what is built into these tools are also digital behavioral interventions. So basically, behavior change method to support your change. This can come in the form of rewards or incentives. So you collect gamified elements, points. They remind you to be more engaged with the behavior. They help you with personalized goal setting and give you feedback on your progress. And this concept from fitness and sports has already been transferred to the mobility field, even before DyMoN came along, of course. And we're talking about mobility apps, urban mobility apps that want to motivate the switch from individual car use to bicycling, public transport, or walking. And they're not just showing you the bus schedule or letting you buy a ticket, but they also have these digital behavioral interventions built into them. That might look like a voucher that you get for a certain number of kilometers bicycled, or you would collect gamified elements as incentive. Many of them also operate with leaderboards, which means that the most active users are on top of a ranking, and this is a social reward then. And in a previous project that came before DyMoN, that was called Simplicity, we also experimented with designing such an app. And this was more a general approach to sustainable behavior within a city. But one of the elements was mobility behavior, sustainable mobility behavior. And what was built within the app was a mobility tracker, which was a semi-automatic way for people to track their walking and bicycling. And we wanted to make an experiment with this mobility tracker and nudging in order to engage people more with the mobility tracker and also to lead them to more bicycling and walking in everyday life. So what we did over a couple of weeks' time, we sent our users push notifications on the app that were based on social comparison. So the way this app was designed was very much in terms of neighborhoods, communities, and districts. So we used the neighbors as the relevant reference group. So we would send our users messages like, your neighbors leaving you behind on their bicycles, let's use the mobility tracker as well. And then we would compare the results before the intervention, during and after the intervention with our nudges based on social comparison. And what we observed were quite promising results. So we could see an increase in more bicycling and more people on their bicycles during the intervention time. However, what we also saw that even after the intervention ended, we still had a lot more people bicycling and more bicyclists basically around. And of course, I could say now that we established long-term behavior change. And I'm a little bit careful with such assumptions, because something we did not consider in this experiment, we were not able to, was the role of context, for example, the weather. And this can have a big impact on mobility choices. And if you want to go deeper into this publication and in the experiment, I want to refer you to the link to this article. Maybe someone from the team can put the link into the chat if you want to check it out there. So we did our own experiment on designing such an app, and rather early on in the DyMoN project, we wanted to get an overview of what else is out there. So we did an analysis of those urban mobility apps. Now, our goal was to really see an overview of commonly used digital behavioral interventions for sustainable mobility. So what is out there and what are others doing? So we searched for mobile applications that encourage more sustainable mobility choices. So as I said, not just information about the bus schedule or not just buying a ticket, but really an element of promotion of sustainable urban mobility, such as greenhouse gas emission data or gamification elements. And we conducted the search in the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store last summer, or summer 2022. And at that time, 26 apps fits our search criteria, covering over 220 cities and 18 different countries. And I know this is a very dynamic field, so some of these apps might not be around anymore, and maybe we find many others, but this just reflects the timing of the analysis. So we looked then at the top behavioral interventions that were used in such urban mobility apps. And we found that the top interventions was, there were feedback and monitoring. So these apps give you basically an overview of your behavior and make you aware of your mobility choices and let you monitor that. Then we have rewards and gamifications, of course, as features. Many of these apps also let you plan new trips. So they help you in selecting the greenest route to go to your destination. Many of them operate also with reminders and prompts in order to keep you engaged. And what was also observed was they operate with knowledge about consequences. So they try to educate you usually about the environmental consequences of your behavior. What we also observed is that these psychological models of behavior change that we are going to talk about in a minute later on, they are still not that commonly used within those apps and in many mobility projects. And it's not just us stating that. There are other authors there that warn about also that this could limit really the potential for supporting change, because there are just many more interventions out there than the ones that I just listed that came out of this analysis. And if you're interested in this urban app analysis, I would like to refer you to our related publication that was published this year in Behavioral Economics Guide, and you can read up on the details there. So what do we have to offer now? What can we contribute to this discussion? And one of the results I want to refer to is the DyMoN Nudging Repository. Now, nudging repository sounds very technical, and to a degree it is. But basically what the core of it is, it's a list of digital nudges to motivate bicycling, walking, and public transport. So basically a structured, categorized list of text elements that you can use as notifications, for example, within already existing apps. So the idea for us was not to create yet another app, because I think there are a lot of great apps out there, but something that could be an add-on to other apps, whether it be mobility apps or a fitness app or a sustainable behavior app. And the nudges that are in the repository, they can be used for commuting. They can also be used for mobility behavior during leisure or on the weekend. And these nudges were built on a psychological model of behavior change, and I will explain that in a minute. But what is also in the nudging repository and what makes it quite unique is that there are also situational factors in there that can be added as additional, quite crucial context elements for our digital nudges. So I already talked about the context, that the weather, for example, is very important for mobility choices. And for mobility behavior, of course, we can think of other information that is important when we make our choice for the mode of mobility. So how is the weather going to be today? Of course, the weather forecast. How is the infrastructure where I am currently? Are there bicycle lanes? Are there bus stops? How is the traffic situation? What's going on the streets right now? Bikeability and walkability, they refer to, am I able to bike or walk somewhere with a reasonable distance, and is it safe for me to do so? And these situational factors that are noted down in the nudging repository, they really determine the content and the timing of the nudge. And if you are familiar with that term from the health field, just-in-time adaptive interventions, that's basically the same idea. So you have the context, the situation of a person, and this situation then influences what kind of information, what kind of intervention this person receives. For the mobility field, this is quite unique so far. But as I said, if you're familiar with just-in-time adaptive intervention, it's basically the same idea. So we built the nudging repository on a model of behavior change. My colleague David will talk about it later. It's the COM-B model by Susan Mickey and colleagues, and we transferred that into the mobility field. There's also a related behavior change techniques taxonomy that those nudges are basically resting on. And what was also important to us, that we have an element of co-creation of these nudges within the repository with citizens and with users of these apps. Because one common concern that we get about nudging is that it's a top-down paternalistic process where people are forced into decisions on a subconscious level, doing things they're not really aware of. And I agree that might be true for many fields or many topics. I do think that mobility behavior is a little bit too complex to pressure people into something they don't want to do. But still, we wanted to co-create with users, and we showed them also what is in our repository, and they were not concerned with the ethics of the nudges within the repository. However, they had, of course, concerns or thoughts about data privacy. And if you want to hear more about this element of data privacy and also how we model the situational factors in terms of data, I would really refer you to the next webinar coming up in January, because this will be very data and technology focused. So in the nudging repository, we have 166 digital nudges that you can use. So text elements or texts, they cluster into 16 groups of behavior change methods, representing 46 different behavior change techniques or interventions. One of them, for example, social comparison. And of course, you can use those nudges with the situational context, which would require some kind of data hub or technological effort in order to establish the connection between the nudge and the situation. And as I said, the third webinar will be all about this. But you can also use those nudges to a certain degree just without any data. So you can just use them as add-ons as they are, using just a fixed time schedule, for example, to sending them out. To make it a little bit more concrete with the nudging repository, I brought a couple of examples. So the first example is a technique or intervention where we give information about emotional consequence. So the text, the related nudge would be, imagine how proud you will be today if you bicycle to work, even if the weather is not perfect. So the active ingredient in this nudge is we get people to think about how good they would feel if they bicycle, if they choose a sustainable form of mobility, in this case, bicycling. And you can also already see that there is a situation modeled in there. So the weather is not perfect, but this would only be sent out when the weather is not good, so when there's rainfall. Another example is self-reward. The text would be, here's a suggestion. If you walk to work today in the rain, you have definitely earned a reward. Maybe some nice coffee, a slice of cake, or both. So this has the idea behind it that in order to keep behavior change going, you need to reward yourself from time to time. And again, we have the reference to rain in there. So this would only go out to people if it's raining. And then on the cell phone, on the right-hand side of the slide, you have a reminder. It's a beautiful day to bicycle to work. The weather is so nice. So here you have a reference to good weather. It's a reminder to engage in the behavior, and this would be sent out in case the weather is good. So again, a deeper look into this repository. So how the repository is structured. You have a nudge text that you can use for push notification within your app. You can also do SMS, or you can write them into emails. In this case, we are again at the emotional consequence one. So you will feel good if you bicycle today, even if it's raining. Then we have the element of behavior change model that we are targeting, in this case, motivation. Behavioral intervention, I already talked about this. We are providing people with information about emotional consequences of performing the behavior. The mobility mode in this case is bicycling. So we have bicycling, public transport, and walking in there. Situation aware indicates that there is situational information that determines the sending out of the nudge. So the weather forecast for the current day, in this case, would need rainfall. We are referring to user location. So is there a good bicycle lane? Is there a reasonable bicycling distance to destination? And I'm repeating myself, but in the third webinar, my colleagues will show you how this is done in terms of data. And then the trip purpose for this nudge would be commuting, and the time frame for the nudge would be weekday mornings, because it makes sense to send this out in the morning when people are getting ready to get to work, and not in the afternoon when it's already too late. So you can download the nudging repository at the link that we provided here. There's an Excel version, which is basically the list of nudges, and there's also a PDF document that explains all the different variables. And if you have questions about this, I would be happy to answer them afterwards. And now I will be giving over to my colleague David, and we will be talking about a product, a result of the project we are very proud of, which is the handbook for digital nudging for sustainable mobility. And yes, David, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Claudia, for this introduction to digital behavior change and into our nudging repository. And I will share my screen real quick and then continue talking. So maybe a few words to myself. My name's David. I'm working with Salzburg Research for a year now as a junior innovation researcher, and currently studying psychology in my master's degree in Salzburg. And for my part, we will be diving a bit deeper into the handbook we created on digital nudging for sustainable mobility, and really get to work with the topic. So before we start, let's shortly think about who was the target audience we had in mind when we created the handbook, because we really didn't want to create another product from researchers to researchers, but we wanted something that a broad audience could stomach. So we had in mind local decision makers, providers of transport infrastructure and services, as well as app developers, and of course researchers. But this just means that the handbook is really accessible without too much background knowledge, and it's easily digestible for anyone who is interested in changing mobility behavior with nudges. So the purpose of the handbook really was to give an introduction to digital behavior change and nudging, to give more information on how to design behavioral interventions, to introduce also the nudging repository, and give an example use cases so that you really see how you can implement this in practice. Then we'll dive into how to use data for situational nudges. And last but not least, we created some canvases that can be used for inspiration. If you really want to create your own campaign, then this is the place to go to have a starting point, basically. So the content really mirrors these intentions. The first few chapters are focused on the theoretical background. Chapter 6 I want to highlight is focused on designing behavioral interventions. We provide a step-by-step guide, basically, so that you know what to think about and what to remember. And the last part is more focused on situational aware nudges, how to use data to implement these situation awareness, and how to use the data you collect for other purposes too. And of course, it's at the end of the handbook, we'll have the canvases and the inspiration. You'll see some of the canvases later on too. So now let's dive into the theoretical background model that stands behind DyMoN and the whole project, which is the COM-B model Claudia already mentioned before. This is a model of human behavior, which basically proposes that behavior consists of 3 elements, namely capability, motivation, and opportunity. And these 3 aspects influence the behavior. And all of those aspects, again, are divided into small, hard aspects, let's say, like that. Capabilities can be physical as well as psychological capabilities. And this means physical capabilities is relatively clear. This means the fitness level. For example, if you talk about driving a bike, is the person really able to drive the bike? Does she have the fitness, or is the person not hindered by any impairment? Then psychological capabilities is basically everything that has to do with knowledge, with skill, memory, attention. So all the thought processes that are important to carry out the behavior. Opportunity includes social as well as physical opportunities. And physical opportunities is quite clear. These are basically the infrastructure around you. If you have a good bicycling lane, then you have good opportunity to go by bike. Social opportunities is a bit more tricky to define, but this basically means, do you have a peer group around you that will accept the behavior you want to show? So for example, if you're in a company where driving by car is really the main base behavior, then you may be the odd one out when you tell them, oh, I took the bike today. And this could mean that you don't really have the social opportunity to use the bike. And motivation is basically all motivational processes that come into play when a person decides which behavior to do. So this can be conscious processes like conscious decisions, but also unconscious processes like habits or emotional responses, which influence our motivation. And these 3 aspects really work together to inform the behavior we show. So I brought to you also some examples how to target each of these aspects. And please keep in mind now, these examples are not purely digital, because some aspects are really easier to target outside of the digital realm. For example, of course, the opportunity, changing the infrastructure will always have more impact on opportunity than a digital intervention. And another one could be giving out free tickets to public transport. To target motivation, you could use incentives if the car is not used. This could also be implemented in a digital variant. And another version could be launching a campaign in a neighborhood to engage all the families there to walk and bicycle together. And target capability, you could, for example, give out bicycle lessons to teach people how to drive a bike, or make bus schedules easier to understand and more accessible. Now that we have an idea on how SOS interventions could look like, here's the step-by-step on how to design these interventions. It's from chapter 6 from the handbook. And the first thing you should think about, of course, what is the current problem you face? Once this problem is defined properly, you can think about what should the people do instead of the behavior that causes the problem. After that, you should really think about who are these people who do the behavior. And this is your target group. This is really important to define properly, because it will inform the next step and make it all the easier to design an effective intervention. In the next step, you think about, okay, which barriers hinder the people from showing the target behavior. And again, this is important to clearly define, because in the 5th step, you think about the behavioral intervention and how it can remove these barriers. So you see, there's a few steps before you even think about the behavioral intervention itself, but all of these steps are really important to create a good working foundation to create an effective intervention. We've also created a canvas for this step-by-step process for defining target behaviors and barriers. And this canvas is the one I would like to work through with you on Mural. I will talk you through the thought process we went through when we designed the interventions for our field test in Salzburg, Science City Aktiv Mobil. And you can, if you're interested, add some of your own problems, maybe target groups, interventions. And I would be glad if some ideas showed up and we get a creative combination. So if you click on the link to Mural, you'll see this field where you can tap on View as Visitor, then enter a name. You can also just don't enter a name if you want to stay anonymous, then you're just a random animal. And I will continue the presentation in Mural. Here we are. So this is the canvas we're working with. We have a lot of sticky notes at the side. You can pull those with the left mouse. If you want to move around the canvas, you can press the right mouse and hold it and move the mouse around. For zooming, you can use the wheel on the mouse, or you can press plus or minus down here on the right-hand side. So we will also start at the first question. What is the current problem? And for Science City Aktiv Mobil, the problem was, well, Science City Aktiv Mobil took place in Science City Itzling, which is an area in Salzburg where a lot of smaller companies are located. And there's really not a lot of parking space. But still, a lot of people commute by car, and especially on Tuesday to Thursday, there's not very much space, and well, people tend to have to drive far away to park their cars and walk here. So this was the problem. The behavior we wanted to see from the people to alleviate this problem was that, especially on days Tuesday to Thursday, they should use more sustainable modes of transport. For example, the bus or the bike, because the bus connections are really good to Science City Itzling, and also the bicycling network in Salzburg is really nice to use and enjoyable. The next step was to think about our target group, and our target group in this case were really everyone that was working in the area and was currently commuting by car, which means we have quite a diverse group concerning age and gender, but defined in the sense that we were focused on one area and on the people who were commuting. We then thought about which barriers hinder those people from showing target behavior, namely using sustainable modes of transport. And we came up with these are 4 examples. We came up with more, but I picked those out. Namely, we thought that the people had a lack of motivation to bike in bad weather. So when it's raining, it's raining often in Salzburg, sadly, it's not too pleasant to go by bike. Adding to that, there may be a problem that some people lack the adequate equipment to use the bike in bad weather. For the bus, the problem arose that maybe some of the people really don't have the knowledge of the bus schedules and just get up in the morning, have a look at the bus app, and then they realize, oh shit, the bus went 2 minutes ago. Well, I'll go by car then, I guess. The second problem that came up was that the time on the bus somehow feels wasted to some people because you just sit there and driving the car feels more active. So we had quite a few of interventions we answered to that, and these interventions are really basically nudges we send out as notifications. It's we send those out as a sentence or 2, always in the morning and in the evening, to nudge the people to use sustainable modes of transport. And for the first, the lack of motivation to bike in bad weather, we thought we'll really focus on social comparison. So we sent out the information, hey, your colleagues cycled through the rain today. don't stay behind, and this activated kind of a competitive thing and the community aspect of this tough community of bicycling people who aren't bothered by the weather. Regarding the lack of adequate equipment, we sent out a notification in the evening to remind the people to either buy adequate rain equipment if they don't have any, or to prepare it in the evening already, so that they can start out the next day with their rain trousers and their jacket and don't have to fear getting wet on the way. The problem to the missing knowledge of bus schedules was really into a similar vein. Namely, we sent out a nudge in the evening to remind the people to plan their commute the evening before they had to commute, basically. So they could focus on searching the bus in peace and don't have to worry too much about timing. And then in the morning, they just had to get up at the time they thought of in the evening and were ready to go. For the problem that the time on the bus feels kind of wasted, we used reframing and told the people, hey, maybe use the time on the bus for mails or a podcast so that the time is really something for yourself and doesn't feel too wasted in the process. And well, this is the whole process we went through for Science City Aktiv Mobil, the campaign we had here in Salzburg. We had another example already there, which is the example we included in the handbook. It's on the green sticky notes. Feel free to have a look at it. And I will keep the mural open until the end of the session, maybe longer, so that you can input some more ideas and a bit work bit together, maybe can help out with behavioral interventions. But for the sake of timing, I will switch back to my presentation and continue. I have a few more slides, and then we can come back to it later, maybe. All right. So what I want to talk about real quick still is situation-aware digital nudging. We already heard that the inclusion of relevant context into a nudge can be really important. Relevant context might be the weather, traffic, or bikeability or walkability. And we do that because personalized nudges are perceived as more relevant and have a better chance in achieving behavior change. And this is really made possible through the data hub and the nudging repository, which we already talked about and which we will talk about in the next session in more detail. Dr. Martin Leudel and Sebastian Gatscher are really the expert in this topic and can tell you way more about it than I could possibly. But I can show you why situation-aware nudges are more effective. And for that, we'll have a look at a persona we created. This persona is also in the handbook again, but let's call her Michaela. Michaela has a 4-kilometer commute to work, and she usually drives it by car. The public transport connection from her home to her workplace is kind of bad. She can do it, but she has to switch the bus 2 times, and it's not that comfortable. Also, the neighborhood she lives in is kind of unpleasant and unsafe, and she feels uncomfortable going to the bus station. But the city implemented a new bicycling network around her area into her workplace, so there might be an opportunity there. And now there's a few possibilities of nudges to send out to Michaela. One may be, for example, hey, walk to work, daily physical activity improves your health. And while this is certainly true, it wouldn't help Michaela very much, because 4 kilometers are really far, and it would take an hour for her to get there. Also, the neighborhood is kind of unsafe, and yeah, so she will see the nudge and think, oh no, that's not relevant for me, and maybe even leave the campaign. Second possibility would be to send out a nudge saying, take the bus, there's a connection to your destination. And this is technically true. There is a connection, but it's, as we already established, not too comfortable to drive with two times switching the bus. So Michaela will see this nudge, think to herself, yeah, I mean, technically you're right, but no, I don't want to. And she still will take the car. Now, the third possibility would be enjoy riding through nature and save time, take your bike to work. And this notification would really hit a spot because it refers to the new bicycling network that is established in her area that maybe goes through a park. And it tells her she can save time that she would spend in traffic other ways. So she would probably see this, think to herself, yeah, that's a good idea. I could use the news network and this nudge could be effective. Now keep in mind, this really works best in combination with the infrastructural change of this new bicycling network. If the network would be bad, then this nudge wouldn't have the power it has, basically. And I've seen one question in the chat already, which I would like to answer right now.
We can take the questions, David, in the end.
Should we do it in the end?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
Good. I will do it in the end.
We have 10 minutes more, so we can keep some time for the questions as well.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
We'll do it like that. Then let's head back. I would like to show the canvas we created for the persona. So this will help you create your own persona, as we did with Michaela, which will help you to think about which barriers the target group faces and how you can remove this barrier with behavioral interventions. And for the next slide, I will show you the other canvases we created so that you get an idea what you can be working with when you get the handbook. One would be a canvas helping you to gather the information you need for situational-aware nudges. And you can basically fill in which information do I need for my campaign, what for, and how could I get it, just to keep an overview and know what is really needed. The following canvas will help you gather the stakeholders you might need for your sustainable mobility campaign. And again, to help you get an overview of whom you might need to contact and who you can work with. We started out with citizens, city officials, app developers, data suppliers, and data processing controllers. And these are the big groups that are really important for the campaign. This one will help you to think about what opportunity threats could come up when you design this campaign, maybe strengths and weaknesses too. And last but not least, a little creative exercise for you. What would your ideal nudging app look like? And this is really to play around with and then give to the app developers and UX designers to show them, hey, this is what I have in mind. Can you do anything like that? So that they have an idea to work with. And everything I presented, all the nice graphics and the canvases are from this handbook we talked about very, very often already. I'll mention it once again. You can download it for free from salzburgresearch.at. And this already concludes my talk. So thank you, Harris, for your moderation. Thank you, Claudia, for the introduction to digital nudging and nudging repository again. And if any of you have further questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end. And of course, you can always refer to the DyMoN website for an overview of the project and salzburgresearch.at for the download of the handbook. And maybe a reminder for the next webinar, we've mentioned it quite often. It's on 11th of January next year, and it's focused on how to use data to support sustainable mobility behavior. And exactly, the recordings from webinar 1 are already available, again on DyMoN.eu. And that's it from my side. Now we can answer the questions.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Claudia. And I would like to thank also OASK, Open, Agile, and Sustainable Series, because they have been working for this webinar as well, Judith and Sarah. We have 9 minutes more for questions. So the chat has been quite active here. So I will go directly to the questions. And I'm really happy because today you have been quite generous as well with so many tools. And this is the beauty of open science. You can just download these tools, you can use it, you can use them for your everyday work. And if you have any more questions, we can absolutely discuss more after this webinar. But I will go directly to one of these questions that Ida asked. Does a nudge needs to be delivered in text? For example, in choosing routes, different visualization models have been proven to have an effect on route choices. Does text have a stronger effect, for example, via adjectives, tone, or speech? Claudia, I guess this question is for you. Would you like to?
Yeah, very shortly, of course, we can be open to the methods we use. So I know that visualization can be a great tool to show where can I bike to, where can I walk to, is this really feasible for me? We just chose this text-based information because it's easier to provide input to already existing apps in this way, rather than saying you need to implement a new feature. But of course, you can take a visualization route, or we can think of many other digital implementation features that could serve as a nudge.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Ida, would you like to add anything here? Are you? No, perfect.
No, it's perfect. Thank you.
Good to hear. Then we go to Maria's question. The collection and categorization of digital nudges is truly high and highly valuable deliverable. Thank you very much for sharing. It's a pleasure. Has been generous, as I said, today with so many tools. So the question relates to whether you have any indications or whether you collected any data on this that, besides context, culture, maybe also play a role. And if somebody would think that cultural background or values might lead to different perceptions and reactions to all these different nudges. Claudia, yeah. Again, yes, yeah.
I'm taking it again.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree with you. So we know that culture and individual backgrounds, also gender, can have a big effect on how people react to behavioral change interventions. The reason why we could not consider it so deeply is that it's a matter of data privacy. So when we are looking at digital app-based interventions, I cannot collect, unfortunately, so much about the person, or we would go like beyond issues of data privacy. But I agree that depending on the values of a person, depending on the gender, depending on the cultural background, of course, this could make a big difference. And I do remember a very long discussion in the consortium, what actually is the situation, what is the context, and how much does the person's own personality and her own background play into this. So I agree, but this is not something that we could cover within our approach.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Claudia. And I think the next question goes to David, because David. So this question is coming from Florian. How do we find the right balance? How we can get the right balance of the number of notifications? Can many notifications be spamming, David?
Yeah, this is actually a question that came up when we designed the campaign Science Collective Mobile, because we had a test phase where we were trying out 3 nudges a day, which was 1 in the morning, 1 during the day, and 1 in the evening. And we got the feedback that 3 is already too much. So from our personal experience, we recommend 2 nudges at most, 1 in the evening, 1 in the morning, because then, as you said, when it's too many, it can bother some people. Some also that said to us that 2 nudges are already too much. But I feel like it's a good balance of getting information across to the user without bothering them too much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
one question from my side as well to both of you. Is punishment a nudge? Is punishment a nudge?
No,
Why
punishment is
not,
not a nudge.
Claudia?
Because nudge preserves freedom of choice. So in my perspective, it is not necessarily a nudge. No. Harris, we have one more question in the chat. Did you realize?
Okay, Vasiliki, what should we mostly take into account if we want to engage a big amount of users in using mobility app?
Yeah, that's a very good question to end this webinar, because we all ourselves are asking ourselves this question. And from our experience, I think the only thing I can say is maybe not to focus on mobility apps or sustainable mobility apps only, because you usually find people in there that are already showing a lot of sustainable mobility behavior. So you have not your target group in there, but the people who are already bicycling all day long, basically. So one approach that we tried is we used an app for company health promotion. So give it a little bit of a different spin to reach a broader target group. So focus on health, fitness, other topics than just saving the environment. And what we also learned, and we will talk about more on this on webinar 4, is that you cannot just expect that there is a new app and people will download it and use it all the time. So that's a little bit unrealistic. What helped for us, at least to some degree, is having a relation to like the real world, having events, having a community, having get-togethers. So that it's just more relevant for people and to keep them engaged. And if you have the budget, a big marketing budget helps.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. It sounds clever.
Yeah. And I have a last one before I have one from my side as well, before we continue or finish. David, you very nicely explained the digital nudges that have been applied in the program and the project.
Yep.
Do we know the effectiveness of these nudges? How we measure the effectiveness of these nudges? And if we applied the same nudges like in a physical environment, would that be equally effective?
So
Possibly do not
regarding the
know
effectiveness-
because
yeah, I'll talk a bit more about this in the last webinar, actually, where we talk about a bit more of campaign. But I can already say that our target, our group we reached was a bit small, so we didn't have quantitative data. We have some qualitative feedback though on what was motivating for the people during the campaign. And that really boiled down to, as Claudia already mentioned, the events were really helpful. Then the nudges were effective, or were perceived as motivating. And with the nudges, certain content was more motivating than other. And the most like motivating content was information about health, if I remember correctly. I will not spoiler too much, keep the rest for the last webinar, but
perfect.
that's so far.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. Yeah, this time it's already 3 o'clock, so we have to finish. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you very much, Claudia. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Judith and Sarah, that you organized this webinar. I just wanted to show you this last picture that David showed in his presentation. Feel free to block your agendas 11th of January, because then we will talk about, as David mentioned, about the use of data, sustainability, mobility, behavior, but also we will talk a little bit about how co-creation can lead to transitional change. We had a hackathon here in Uppsala that 3 cities of Sweden in Sweden participated, including Gävle, and we'll be happy to share our experience with you. Thank you very much for today, and block your agendas and see you next time. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you.